There are two pieces of data in Paul's letters that suggest that Paul thought he was writing about a historical person. The first is Galatians 4:4, when Paul says that Jesus was born of a woman, born under the law. The word I just translated born is Ginomai, and Ginomai means become, among other things. It can also mean to make, or to be born, or to appear. How do scholars know what a word means in context? Basically, whatever the least surprising meaning of a word in context is what the word means.
Well, generally speaking, I think that this is a really good, solid way to figure out how somebody is using a word or what definition somebody is using for a word. But we also have to keep in mind that we're talking about a different culture as well as a different language entirely. It's not just the least surprising meaning of a word in the given context, it's the least surprising meaning or out of place definition for a word for that particular author. And we can figure out what the least surprising meaning of a word is for a particular author by analyzing how that author uses that same word in similar contexts. So when analyzing a word like Ginomai, it's not only important to analyze the context in which it is used, but also to analyze how Paul uses it in other similar contexts. So some questions that we should ask ourselves while doing this are, what is a natural reading for Paul? Does Paul always use this word to denote human birth? Or does he use other words to denote a human birth? In the instance of Galatians 4:4, on a surface level reading of that passage, it does seem like the natural meaning of the word Ginomai would be human birth. But the one thing that really casts a lot of doubt on that particular meaning is the fact that it's contained within an allegory. And Paul even explicitly states that it is an allegory. So if Paul means that it's a literal human birth, then he must use that same word when denoting other human births, right? Except the problem is that he doesn't. And as Laura demonstrated, it is an ambiguous word to use for birth. Elsewhere in Paul's writings, whenever he wants to explicitly denote that somebody was born, he uses the word gennao. Gennao is a very explicit Greek word to denote that somebody was born. Even within this same allegory that we're discussing here, Paul uses the word gennao in order to reference other people's births, but strangely enough, not Jesus's. So this begs the question of why did Paul only specifically use Ginomai to denote Jesus's birth, while using a completely different word that is more explicit about human birth? So let's take a look at how Paul uses Ginomai in other similar contexts. In 1 Corinthians 15:37, Paul describes our future resurrection bodies as being made or manufactured, using the exact same word that he uses for Jesus's birth. Now, unless I'm wrong about Christian theology, it seems to me like our future resurrection bodies are not born of a woman, but are rather manufactured by God. And then if we go forward a little bit in 1 Corinthians 15:45, we see Paul describing that Adam was made in the same way, using the same words that Jesus was described as being born or constructed. But again, this begs the question, why would Paul use the same word, Ginomai, for Jesus' birth, and also for our future resurrection bodies, and for Adam's body, both of which were not born of a woman, but manufactured by God? I mean, does it not matter how Paul uses the same word across all his writings? To me, it seems like this is a very special pleading argument on Laura's end to suggest that Paul was specifically using a literal birth meaning for Ginomai in this particular passage, and that Ginomai is only ever used to reference a literal birth when referencing Jesus, but not when referencing our future resurrection bodies and Adam's body.
For example, if I say the bark of a tree, the intuitive meaning is that I mean the hard thing that goes around the outside of a tree. You would need some obvious clue that I actually mean the barking sound a tree makes. So if you say Ginomai about a cup, you mean made. If you say Ginomai about a man from a woman, you mean born.
Okay, first off, this analogy just doesn't make any kind of sense. Of course, trees don't make a barking sound like a dog. So your analogy has failed because of the drastic difference between the different uses of the word bark. Being made from sperm and being born of a woman is a slightly nuanced difference. Both are in fact making a human. Given the fact that the Gospels specifically state that Jesus was made by the Holy Spirit impregnating Mary, and not that Joseph impregnated her, is a clear indication explanation that there is a subtle nuance between manufacturing a human and naturally producing a human through normal means. And again, I agree. The methodology that she presents is a good way to determine how a person is using a specific word. But given what we've learned about Paul's use of Ginomai, it really doesn't seem like he would naturally feel like Ginomai is used to denote human birth. In fact, it seems the natural word that Paul would use would be gennao. So her explanation is actually the less parsimonious one.
Mythicists say that to be made from a woman means to be manufactured with the aid of a woman's body in the heavenlies with the demonically stolen sperm of David.
No, that is not what any reasonable and factually based mythicist would say. Now, I have been researching mythicism for a long time, and I have never seen any mythicist make this specific argument. So my gut feeling here is that you're strawmanning, because this particular section seems to be a mishmash of several different ideas that to me just exposes how Laura doesn't actually know what the mythicist position is. At least the minimal mythicist position is, which is the strongest mythicist position. First of all, we agree that Paul could be talking about a natural human birth here. But we also acknowledge that Paul does not use that word to acknowledge human birth at all. And in that very same passage, Paul uses a completely different word, gennao, to explicitly state that somebody had a natural birth. And then we get into the demonically stolen seed of David, which is actually a mishmash of several different ideas. First of all, we get the idea that Jesus was possibly and probably made from the sperm of David because of 2 Samuel 7:12 through 14. That passage explicitly states that the Messiah archangel would be constructed or made from the seed of David. So that would be God holding on to the sperm of David so that he could, in the future, construct the Messiah archangel's body that he is to inhabit. The demon stealing David's sperm is not to construct Jesus at all. Later Jewish legends have demons stealing the sperm of David while he's sleeping in order to create the enemy rulers that he faces. So, as far as I know, what Laura has described here is nothing that any minimal mythicist would actually say. And it's definitely not the strongest mythicist position. I kind of feel like she's constructing this in order to make the mythicist position all around seem unreasonable.
So basically they take the barking tree every single time.
Well, Ian here is trying to suggest that mythicists are making a special pleading case for the definition of Ginomai. But I would counter that with saying that they are actually the ones that are making the special pleading case for the definition of Ginomai used in that particular verse. They seem to totally ignore how Paul uses Ginomai to refer to other manufactured bodies. Unless, of course, they think that our future resurrection bodies, as well as Adam's body, was actually born of a woman, which wouldn't make a lot of sense.